do not spare you from webinar events.
I think that's a very. I think it's good that we are moving to that. No doubt about it. And I just hope we have better connectivity in India.
Oh, okay. And I don't know if you met Professor Honorary Ramachandra Kuduri. I think his name right. So he's there, and I'm sure you met Professor Nalapat earlier in Pondicherry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's Honorary Subramania Raju, who runs the Maritime Security Center.
Very good. Very good.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And we have Monica, who's temporarily taken a break from China. She's doing her studies in China. She's here because of the COVID, but she's helping us out with understanding some of the issues in China.
Wonderful.
Monica, that is Professor Nalapat. You have heard him on so many occasions, I'm sure.
Yes, sir. And Professor Raju was my mentor.
Okay.
Very good. Very good.
So them 60 people have registered, so we may give them another 3-4 minutes to join.
Sure. It's up to you. You decide.
Yeah. So we'll just give them another. It's only 55 now. Another 5 minutes to see how many come in. Since 60 plus have registered, I will just give them another 3-4 minutes to sort out the technical issues.
I presume this will be on YouTube, etc. I'm sure.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What we don't do it simultaneously. We record it and edit it if required, and then put it.
Fine.
We'll send you the links.
That's always a good idea.
Yeah. Not too much. We don't want to change anything that's set in the thing, just to cut off the preliminaries and other things which are there. Otherwise, the intention is to be as open as this in YouTube. We are not China.
Thank God.
This is the other thing, you see the way Ambassador Sun Yodong has been using our media, our newspapers, our TV channels, and all that. And when it comes to our own people trying to even send a rebuttal to Global Times, they refuse to even publish it.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't on that seminar, but I was a bit surprised that he got away so lightly. I mean,
Absolutely.
it was hardly any questioning.
It's ridiculous. I think the problem is with us, in the sense we give them too much of mileage. And, knowing fully well that, that kind of facilities will not be extended to us when we want to interact with people in China. That's a harsh reality.
I know. Anyway, I mean, one needn't be rude, but at least one could ask him to stick to the facts.
Yeah, I know, but we could not expect anything more from him. After all, he has to go the official line, otherwise he'll lose his job.
Well, there's no need for us to take the same line.
Exactly. So knowing that he will not say anything other than what the party tells him, it's pointless getting him.
I agree.
If you think you exposed him, what have we exposed him about? Nothing. Because he's not even being frank. He's not saying the onus is on you. You violated us first. This tamasha goes on everywhere.
Well, I mean, I think the Chinese have put a lot of faith in the US election.
Let's see who wins. I think America has surprised everybody last time, so we never know. They might surprise everybody this time.
Unless Biden does very badly in the debates, I think he is going to sail through. But if he does very badly in debates, is one thing. Hello, Madhav, how are you?
तो दिल्ली में बारिश वारिश हो रहा है क्या मधु जी? No, I think you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Still muted.
Hi, Admiral Murli. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning,
Professor Nalapat, that's Admiral Murli.
Good morning, sir.
You know,
Good to see you.
he was a former Director General Coast Guard and presently in Kerala.
Right.
Very nice. Good to see you.
Unmute.
Good
Okay.
to have you, Murali.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hi. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
You can hear me now, right?
And
Yeah.
that's Professor Madhubala
Hi.
on your screen. You must have heard her before.
Of course, for heaven's sake.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Admiral Murali. I was introducing
of course, sir.
Professor Madhubala to Admiral Murali.
Thank you. Nice to see you, ma'am. Good to see you
Yes,
again.
nice to see you. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Happy Independence Day.
Same.
Yeah. I can't get this out of here.
Monu, you in Bangalore or Delhi? Where are you?
Oh, very much in Delhi.
Okay.
Very much in Delhi. Yeah. You know, I have a long white strip at the bottom of my screen that I can't get rid of.
Okay.
I'm trying to get rid of this thing.
No, take your mouse on top and click there. It'll come. When you click it once away from there, it'll vanish.
Okay. It doesn't vanish. That's okay. Doesn't matter. It's okay. It's functional. It's all right. It's okay. Yeah. So we had this very interesting conference in the ICWA with NMF, etc. on basically the Western Indian Ocean and cultural relations, right? And we're bringing out a special issue on the Mosam initiative, which is now online, the India actually. So do take a look at that. I think it's very interesting. This conversation on culture and the oceans is very interesting now. Become very interesting.
I'll do that.
Yeah. I think we're online as well. If you go to the ICWA website, you can hear the papers and the conference itself. But I think ICWA is going to bring out a volume on that as well. So it will be in the public domain. You know.
Bala, I think you can start in another couple of minutes. I'll just give another 2 minutes to yourself and then you can set the ball rolling.
Yes, sir.
And the others who would like to chip in thereafter, they can do so at their own convenience.
Yes, sir. Noted, sir.
I think in the registration from Vietnam, and there's another one from Singapore, but I don't see them here. Maybe they'll join in later.
Yes, sir.
Adluri, you are in the dark zone. We can't see your face. Yeah, I can see you now.
Actually, I have a window on the wrong side of my table. So I have to put on light now. You have to see my face.
Okay. All right. Okay, Bala, I can start.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everybody. I would like to extend a warm welcome and a greetings and a happy Independence Day wishes as part of from C3S. First, I would like to, it's a pleasure to have Professor Nalapat sir with us here today. I would like to read the bio of Professor Nalapat with an introduction.
Bala, in these days of the internet, I don't think that's necessary. Let's go right to the top.
I can read out some features because there are some new members here, including from Singapore and Vietnam. So maybe you can just read out some salients.
Yes, sir.
And all others may kindly mute themselves so that there is no background noise.
Yes, Professor M.D. Nalapat sir was a gold medalist in economics and a Daxina fellow from Bombay University. He is also a professor of geopolitics and UNESCO Peace Chair at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, one of India's elite private university. As UNESCO Peace Chair, he has organized major conferences, including on the US, India, China. He has visited US and China frequently, recognizing their importance to India. Professor Nalapat was made Senior Associate of the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, and member of the Institute for Social and Economic Change. He is also associate member of the United Services Institution. He has lectured at several fora, including National Defense College, New Delhi, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, the University of Georgia, Peking, and Fudan University. With this, I would like to give an introduction to the joint C3S-NMF international webinar on Indic routes in South China Sea. The Galwan Valley incident is not an exception in Beijing's recent behavior in Asia. China has also engaged in a tense geopolitical confrontation with its other neighbors. Standoffs with Vietnam and Malaysia in the South China Sea and threatening Australia with boycotts are just one of the few examples. China's aggression is also increasing support for closer coordination between other Indo-Pacific partners. India, Japan, Malaysia, and Australia have all taken concrete steps to reduce their economic exposure to Beijing. The recent one of the Milk Tea Alliance, reaction of people born to forge solidarity between the Taiwanese, Hong Kongers, and Southeast Asians online to deal with the Chinese cyberbullying is a case in point. As India unfolds its maritime security posture and interests, there is a strong commitment from the Indian side to realign with several Southeast Asian countries. India is seen as a vital player in the region, and Southeast Asian countries are keen to partner with India, both economically and strategically. Interestingly, the Indian Navy 2007 doctrine defined South China Sea as an area of strategic interest for India, and the recent Southeast Asia strategy has further reiterated India's commitment to move beyond the Indian Ocean in the South China Sea. With India's maritime discourse expanding and close to around 55% of India's trade passing through this region, it is imperative that India pursues its interest in the region. The Indo-Pacific Trilateral, popularly called as Quad and Quad Plus, further revitalizes India's presence in the region. Thus, the adoption of Indo-Pacific region into the strategic framework has cumulatively summed up the relevance of South China Sea for India. With this, I would like to hand over to my Director, Commodore R.S. Vasan sir, Director C3S, and Regional Director, National Maritime Foundation for opening remarks. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bala. I think you set the ball rolling correctly and by identifying the issues that would be discussed today. I do not want to say more than what you already said, except to say, first of all, a very happy Independence Day to all of you. It's a good day to have a good round of discussions. A very hearty welcome to Professor Madhav Nalapat. You could not have found a better person. When you are thinking of this joint event with National Maritime Foundation, we said, well, this is the confluence of two headings under which we would like to examine it. One of the strategic issues, which is also alluded to by Bala in his introduction. The other thing is about the historical relations that we have had and the cultural relations which have expanded to the countries in East Asia. So, which is when we said we will look at this. For the benefit of others, I must also tell you that there are 4 verticals in which C3S has tried to work. And one of that is the cultural vertical. So one is the cultural, the other is the science and technology, the third is the geopolitics and strategy, and the fourth is economy. So it is under the category of the cultural connect that we have. We've done many programs. In fact, every year we have a flagship program for addressing the cultural historical linkages. And after the Mamalapuram, we are laying even more focus on the Tamil Nadu China Connect. And we've had 3 lectures here, 3 webinars by bringing in scholars, including from Japan, to look at the kind of connectivity that existed and what prompted the empire in Tamil Nadu, whether it's the Cholas or Pallavas, to go all the way to China and vice versa. So without getting into too much of details about what more needs to be said, let me hand over to Professor Nalapat. He hardly needed an introduction, but I was very particular that he read out because there are some new members. Not that he is not aware. Every second day he is in one TV channel or another. And so you will not miss his face, you will not miss his name. And I am sure this will be a very interesting interaction in terms of what he will bring to the table. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm really privileged to come here, the Chennai Center for China Studies. I mean, given the historical links between Chennai, the surrounding regions, and, for example, you go to South China, you will see umpteen examples of the close cultural ties that used to exist there in the past. And you come to South India, whether it is in Cochin or whether it's in Tamil Nadu or in other parts of South India, you'll again see a lot of the symptoms and signs of ancient links between parts of China, the southern part of China, and the southern part of India. Having said that, I would like to say that the history is one thing, yes, but the reality is basically that history is good as a kind of a guide to the present. And what I would like to focus on is the present, and the present as seen through the prism of practical field experience and practical knowledge of what is happening on the ground. So I think that is the what I'm going to really concentrate on. And let me say that from the very beginning, the Chinese Communist Party, which I think is celebrating its centenary in a year's time, the Chinese Communist Party has, in my view, the core ideology is that of Han nationalism. I wouldn't use the word Han supremacy, but I would certainly use the word Han primacy. I think supremacy would be the wrong word, but primacy, I think, would be the right word. A perception of Han primacy. And therefore, if you talk in terms of promoting Han primacy, I think you can very clearly call it a form of nationalism as defined, in the modern world in so many contexts. Now, that, in my view, is the core ideology of the Communist Party of China. If you look at Chairman Mao, for example, and you compare him with, let's say, Karl Marx or Vladimir Lenin, I mean, Marxism, Leninism, they're supposed to be the twin foundations of Marxist thought. Actually, there's a huge disconnect between Leninism and Marxism, but they were brought together. But Mao and Maoism is, in my view, very different from both classic Marxism and classic Leninism. And it's not just because Mao was focusing on the peasants rather than the workers as Lenin was, or rather than the industrial countries as Marx was, but in many other ways. So in my perhaps simple-minded or simplistic or whatever, I mean, everyone is most welcome to use whatever adjectives they use regarding me. The Chinese Communist Party has had this very clear Han primacy drive, and all their tactics and strategies, etc., have been basically fashioned in such a way as to promote that drive. Now, why is this doubly significant? It is doubly significant because it is not simply a cultural construct as it is to us in India, for example. The Cambodians, the Laotians, people in different parts of Southeast Asia, Indonesians. In fact, there are examples of ancient Roman coins having Prakrit, I'm told, as a script in some of the coins. So, but none of this is in any way a question of territoriality. None of this is in any way a question of any kind of primacy. But in the Chinese situation, what is very clearly implied is actually primacy. In other words, the mother country, China, the mother of this civilization, has a primary call on all the children of this civilization. That being the case, you have a kind of an extraterritoriality in terms of the Chinese diaspora. And the Chinese diaspora, let's concentrate on the Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. If you, whether it is in Thailand, whether it is in Indonesia, whether it is in Malaysia, you have a very vibrant Chinese diaspora which is functioning there. And they are quite successful in business and in various other ways. In Malaysia, for example, the Chinese are very successful in business. The same with Indonesia. Of course, in the way that Chinese have across the world, they have very quickly, in a sense, acclimatized themselves on the surface to the local culture. I mean, wherever you go, for example, you'll find Chinese adopting local names. In India, for example, people who have been in India for a long time, they will adopt local names and they'll have their Indian names. In Western cultures and Western countries, they adopt Western names. So there is a very easy acclimatization in terms of the superficial, what do I say, the superficial marks of culture in terms of name, some social practices, overt social practices, etc. While at the same time, the substructure remains very Chinese. So when the doors are locked and closed, when the families get together, when communities get together, then you'll have certain cultures, you'll have certain cultural events that are more, in their view, quintessentially Chinese. And frankly, then the Indonesian names or the Indian names or the Western names or whatever, they're set aside, and they all, in a sense, relate to the magnetism of the mother lode of the culture. Now, what is very interesting is that you have the Chinese Communist Party, which is now seeking to basically be the protector, the promoter, the defender of this particular culture. It's absolutely fascinating. And I'd like to say that I've been, trying to look into this. I've been trying to study this. I can't say I've got very far in it. I can't say that I've understood very much about it, because the Chinese Communist Party itself has been through several trends in its history. China itself has been through several trends. For example, the period just before the Communist Party, the period of warlordism, the period of, for example, Western, the very strong Western influence over China, the period of Japanese occupation of large parts of China. All this has had an impact on culture, which such events indubitably have. And very importantly, the great proletarian cultural revolution started by Mao Zedong. If you remember, Mao Zedong's motto was bombard the headquarters. And essentially, he set out to destroy the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and, in a sense, some of the core principles that were underpinning the Chinese Communist Party at that point in time. Why? Because, as I said, these are what I believe. They need not be what you believe. They need not even be accepted. But I think Mao regarded himself as exemplifying this concept of Han primacy better than the Chinese communist leadership of that point in time. Whether it is Liu Shaoqi or various others, he regarded himself as that, and therefore regarded their downfall as essential to his drive to put forward Han primacy. In that, let's not forget, it is Chairman Mao who opened the door to good relations with the United States. As I recall, and as I keep retelling, back in the 1950s, Mao talked about enjoying swimming in the Yangtze River and also looking forward to swimming in the Mississippi River. Now, Americans being Americans, they're very direct people. I don't think they quite understood the subtlety of Mao's speak. And they never understood that Mao was throwing a very big hint that, look, why don't we be friends? And this was the 1950s, just after the Korean War, frankly, when nobody in America or in China were looking, at friendship. So what I want to say, the Cultural Revolution created a huge amount of, if I may say so, fissures and disconnect in if I may say so, the path of Chinese culture. And a hybrid culture developed as a consequence of that. A hybrid culture developed also as a consequence of the 60 or 70 years before 1949, and a hybrid culture developed in the 70 odd years after 1949, including the major convulsions there, the GP, the Grand Proletarian Cultural Revolution being one of that. What I want to say, why I want to say this today, is that if you remember, at one time Confucius was anathema to Mao Zedong. He talked about the olds, and Confucius was very much into his sides. But today, Confucius has the goal of Han primacy. It is regarded by the Chinese Communist Party core that it's very important that the Chinese Communist Party anchor itself firmly in the ancient traditions of Chinese culture, and that would include Confucius. So now you have this revival of Confucius, you have bringing in Confucius, and of course, a neo-Confucian thought, because some of what is presented as Confucian thought may not entirely be Confucian thought, just as, for example, some theologies, the interpretation of theologies is sometimes very different from what the theologies originally revealed. Confucian thought, as revealed by the master and as revealed in the interpretations, may be entirely different. But the interpretations and every one of these actions subserve this goal of Han primacy. And it's not Han primacy within China. I mean, it's not Han primacy within Southeast Asia or Asia. It's Han primacy across the world as we know it. Now, I have, in fact, as I think every one of you here will know, the Chinese concept of war is not the Western concept of war. I mean, in India, we have so many concepts of war, I'm not entirely sure what our concept is. But the Western concept of war is that you fight with weapons, you've got guns, you've got bombs. And then now, of course, you've got a concept of war in terms of cyber, in terms of info war, and things like that. The Chinese concept of war is very simple, a one-point program of dominating the enemy and having mastery over the enemy, preferably the thinking of the enemy. So the enemy works for you. Just as in some forms of martial arts, the strength of the opponent works for you. And your own weakness in that sense becomes a strength for you. And you use your weakness and the strength of the opponent. So that is the Chinese concept of war. And in my view, the Chinese have been at war with the Western world for quite some time. I mean, even before 1949, certainly large parts of, I would say the political movements in China were saying we'll borrow from the West the way Japan did, but we are not going to be subsumed by the West. Now, what is very interesting is there were periods in Chinese history in which being subsumed by the West went very, very far. And I would like to refer here, for example, to Jiang Zemin period. The Jiang Zemin period was very, very interesting because that period was very obsessively focused on the West. I mean, way back, I recall being in a particular room where the great man was there. And I remember that you had people from India, you had people from Brazil, you had all these people there, very big countries. And then you had these tiny little European countries. And if my memory is right, the great man only had time for those who were from the European countries. He never had any time for those from Brazil or from India or whatever. Although India is a neighbor, Brazil is a huge country. But the entire time was spent on these little European countries. I think, and then if you look at Chinese culture during that period, now you look at Chinese television and the cultural offer, think tanks don't normally study. But in my view, culture is very much ingrained in the concept of war, ingrained in the concept of national resilience, and it needs to be understood as a weapon of war. It needs to be understood as an instrument of war, as an instrument of social transformation. So you look at Chinese culture during that period, it became a very interesting hybrid. Even traditional Chinese opera was presented with a very heavy fusion of Western overlay. You had elements of ballet, you had elements of the tango, you had elements of, God knows what. I'm not really an expert on much of these cultures. I'm afraid I've never danced in my life. So, whether Indian classical dance or Western dance or anything. But it was very, very amazing, frankly, to see this kind of fusion presented as Chinese culture. I think Hu Jintao did something very wise. He kind of slowly started, separating traditional Chinese culture from this fusion culture. And that period was the period, in my view, which marked the, if I may say so, the footsteps to what we are seeing today under Xi Jinping. Because it was Hu Jintao, a very quiet chap, a very understated chap. I mean, in a very different context, he reminds me of P.V. Narasimha Rao, a very quiet chap. Narasimha Rao was not supposed to be a very brave man. So because he was not supposed to be a brave man, the media became brave, the judiciary became brave, the bureaucrats became brave. I mean, look at T.N. Sheshan and various others. Everybody became brave because PV was not seen as brave. But he did a very slow, massive transformation of this country. Hu Jintao, in my view, has done a very slow and massive transformation in the sense he has again sought to anchor the Chinese party, the Chinese state, and the Chinese people through the immense outpouring of information and infomercials and info, whatever you call it, into what he believed was more traditional Chinese culture. So the revival of Confucius, the revival of looking back into the past, the revival of respect for the emperors, all that came into being. And after that, I can tell you, during Hu Jintao's period, if you used to go to China and crack jokes about the Red Emperor, there were no silent and disapproving looks. In fact, there were also approving looks. I'd like to say very clearly, I've gone to China many times. I've gone to the United States many times. From the 90s, I focused on these two countries. And I must also like to say, I like both these countries. I like visiting these places. And I have immense respect for both of these countries. So during that period, it was Hu Jintao's period, frankly, that when you used to crack jokes about the Red Emperor, it was in fact taken as a compliment. It was not taken as something, very off color, as it used to be under Jiang Zemin's time. It was taken as a compliment. So that kind of situation developed. If I may say so, the preconditions, if I may say so, for the emergence of Xi Jinping were created by the sinification that was undertaken within the Chinese Communist Party leadership, core, and therefore through the system, because China is a system where you have a top-down process. The impulses that are there at the top slowly start flowing down below, and eventually spread across the entire, if I may say so, the entire whole of that immense group called the Chinese Communist Party. So Hu Jintao again launched, he basically asked a very simple question that, yes, we are doing very well. Our rate of growth is fantastic. We have got all kinds of new stuff, but we can't even produce an escalator. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting people who I believe are very much embedded in the policy establishment, both in the US and in China. The only country where I met difficulties in that is actually my own country, India, for some odd reason, but not so in China or the United States. But I can say that, this was what was said, that look, an escalator is made from foreign technology. Almost everything is made from foreign technology. A cigarette lighter is made from foreign technology. What on earth is going on? Why can't we do it ourselves? And Hu Jintao, after about 2 or 3 years of his first term of 5 years, into that started indigenizing Chinese technology. And by the close of his second term, he went very far towards that indigenization. Now, I'm not going to get into how and why this success took place. Mahatma Gandhi told us, and I regard the Mahatma as a great saint, one of the great saints of human history, that look, means are after all everything. Forget about the ends. Means are after all everything. There's no point in achieving some of the ends unless you use very correct means. And Gandhiji had very restricted views on what those means should be. I think to the Chinese Communist Party leadership, ends are after all everything. I don't think means matter very much. So frankly, Chairman Mao, I think, was the polar opposite of Mahatma Gandhi in many ways, and certainly in his philosophy of existence, in his philosophy of, if I may say so, getting things done, and the philosophy of nation building. So from that point of view, I'm not going to go into how this happened, except to say that it's very, very clear that the Chinese have succeeded very significantly in ramping up their capacities as a modern techno power. Now, Xi Jinping, I mean, you have a lot of people who are talking in terms of Xi Jinping being, I don't know, likely to be removed, or Xi Jinping being whatever. Look, frankly, I met some of the people who are in a sense, very much part of, embedded in Xi Jinping's group of thought leaders. And I would like to say, I'm very impressed with them. They may be wrong, they may be extremely wrong, but they are very, very considered people. And from the beginning, the Chinese have had some pretty sensible ways of getting things done. For example, a policy. And I think we all know this. Let's say the CCP wanted to introduce a policy. They would first introduce in one town or two towns or something, or a few villages. They will see the impact. If the impact is good, they'll introduce in more towns and villages. They'll see the impact. If the impact is good, they'll do it in an entire province. If the impact is good, they'll do it across the country. It's a very empirical thing, as Deng Xiaoping says, step on the stones and you learn through stepping on the stones. So they would do that, and through that kind of way, they have created a system which is extremely adaptable and a system which is continuing to this day. So those of us who are looking at the fragility of the Chinese system, personally, I think we're going to have to wait a fair amount of time before that happens, if it does happen. Why I want to make all these points is, one, the Chinese Communist Party, the Xi Jinping did something very, very, if I may say so, very, very interesting. He got rid of his enemies of yesterday, he got rid of his enemies of today, and he also got rid, in the last about 2.5 years, of his enemies of tomorrow. Now, how do I define the enemies of tomorrow? Enemies of tomorrow are people who are likely to challenge him in case China goes through a rough patch. Xi Jinping, in my opinion, was well aware that he had entered into a war with the United States, a war of primacy with the United States. He knew it was going to be a difficult war. He knew there were going to be a lot of tremors on the way, and he wanted to eliminate individuals in the leadership who, if a bad time came, will go against him. I think he's done a tremendous amount of success in that. We have all been waiting for the standing committee to stand up to him. We have all been waiting for the central committee to stand up to him, the NPC to stand up to him. There are a lot of problems in China, a lot of economic hardships in China, but I don't see any of this happening because very systematically, his past, present, and future enemies, as identified by Xi Jinping, have been eliminated the way Mao eliminated a significant section of enemies, so that whatever happened in China, Mao was secure. Xi Jinping is, in my view, even though his family has suffered during the if I may say so, during the Cultural Revolution, I think he understood Mao, he respected Mao, he appreciated Mao, and he is really very much following the little red book of Mao Zedong. And I think that's a book that everybody needs to read because it gives an idea of the fundamental thinking of Mao Zedong. Now, you have to understand this country. Why I'm saying all this? Xi Jinping started separating the Chinese monetary system from the US-led monetary system. He started going in, he started going into digital currency. He went into blockchain. Before this was done, I used to have discussions with people who were, active in policy in that particular part of the world. And they used to talk about going into blockchain. Initially, they banned it for a short time. They they wanted to test how the ban will work. They realized all the weaknesses of blockchain and the ban, and then they immediately legalized it, and they put blockchain at the center of their technologies. They have put digital currency at the center of their technologies. My own assessment has been that they are looking at a reset of the US dollar, a fall in the value by 40 to 60%. Now, whether they're trying to engineer it or not, I don't know, I can't say, but certainly the Chinese are anticipating created by them, created by the Americans themselves, created by the world reset of the US dollar. And some US policies have definitely been helpful in that. For example, this weaponization of the dollar, this, going in for so many sanctions and basically making the dollar difficult for countries like Iran, etc., to buy. So it becomes a high risk situation to keep dollars. Let's say, for example, you're in some country like Venezuela or Libya. Libya is a perfect example. The Gaddafi family had a lot of dollars. Almost every last bit of that was confiscated. What happened to Gaddafi's billions in the UK? What happened to Gaddafi's and the Gaddafi's Libyan state's billions in the US? They just vanished into thin air. I don't believe any Libyan government has got hold of that. So today what is happening is the weaponization of the dollar is proving to be a major issue in people saying we don't want this, the dollar is not secure. It is secure in the sense that the US has never gone in for any demonetization. It's the most counterfeited currency in the planet, and it has never gone in for demonetization because they were worried that the impact of demonetization will be to reduce respect for that particular currency and reduce faith in the stability of that currency. So the Americans have avoided demonetization, but this weaponization that has been caused, one point. Second, the point is very simple. The Chinese have been trying to get their firm allies to go in for swap arrangements, whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Iranians, whether it's the Venezuelans, now the Argentinians. They're trying to go in for swap arrangements, renminbi and your currency. Now, why in India we don't ask them to do it for the rupee, I don't know. Because if they start doing it for the rupee, they'll have to buy an awful lot of Indian products with that rupee. And I do believe that if China is as friendly to India as its ambassador assures us it is, I'm sure the Chinese will welcome a situation in which we have a rupee renminbi swap. So we will, basically, the Chinese can pay in rupees, or we, and renminbi. So what happens is that we'll buy from each other. It will be almost a form of barter. The Chinese will have to buy an awful lot more from India than they're buying now. But we have got excellent products. I don't see why they should feel, disadvantaged at all. But the Chinese don't want that. The Russians don't want that. They want India to pay dollars. They don't want a single, a single rupee to be paid except in dollars for some reason. What I want to say, so logistics chains. The Belt and Road project to me was a Eurasian logistics chain. It was the backbone of a new Eurasian logistics chain. The Maritime Silk Route is the backbone of a new China-centric maritime logistics chain. So you try and separate the financial world, you try and separate the logistics world. Of course, you've already done a tremendous amount of separation of the manufacturing world and made it very China-centric. And above all, you move very fast ahead in artificial intelligence. One thing about Xi Jinping, I can tell you, he woke up very quickly to the importance of artificial intelligence as a weapon of war and as a guarantor of progress, and therefore, through, if I may say so, deterrence, maintaining the peace, as seen as desirable by China. So, again, from that point of view, very, very clearly, they had a clear points of view, a clear separation. Now, it took the Americans some time to understand that actually the Chinese have been at war with them for some time. How did I understand this? I'm not subtle like a Chinese is. I mean, I would say, Indians are somewhere in between the Americans and the Chinese in terms of subtlety. So on one of my visits to Beijing in this trade war, I mean, some people were making comments about, the elections are going to come for representatives and, Trump is going to be doing a deal at that point in time. And I didn't give my point of view. I wanted to understand what their point of view was. I didn't want to interject. One of the individuals in one of the dinners, and a lot of the important conversation is done during dinners, as you know, in China. My wife and I were there. We were guests there. A book was handed over to me. And that book was basically Mao Zedong's book on protracted war. It was a book about the war between China and Japan. And that book had two lessons. The first lesson, Mao said, and I would advise every one of you to read that book on protracted war. It was given to me when some people in the group, Chinese, by the way, Lakshmi and I were the only Indians in that particular group. They were talking, oh, well, this is Trump, he's just posturing. They didn't say anything to the Chinese. They just gave me that book. And two lessons. One, anybody in your team that believes you're going to lose the war, dump him immediately. Throw him out. And two, anybody who believes it's going to be an easy battle, throw him out immediately. These are toxic people. People who believe you're going to win easily, and people who believe you're going to lose finally are toxic, throw them out. So essentially, I think the Chinese have been in a protracted war with the United States for a long time. Now, this is about Southeast Asia. And allow me, before, before the hosts feel, completely unhappy with me, allow me to come back to Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is the home of some very thriving Chinese Thai, Chinese Indonesian, Chinese Malaysian, Chinese Vietnamese communities. Chinese Singaporean is obvious, of course, but I'm talking about these other locations. Now, these communities essentially have been told that, look, this is the mother country. And we have the philosophy of Han primacy. You are proud children of the Han. Today, the European people have had primacy for several centuries. But today it's our turn. And of course, we're not going to be as crude as the Europeans. We're not going to be as primitive as they are. We are going to be much more sophisticated, much more subtle, much more whatever it is. But it's our turn now. And how will you help that turn? You will help that turn by basically helping the brain behind this entire project of Han primacy. And that brain is the core of the Chinese Communist Party leadership. So essentially, they're being told the Chinese Communist Party leadership basically knows what it is that you need as a Han China. Whether they feel that way or not, I really don't know. I mean, many of them definitely do not. And the Chinese Communist leadership, therefore, calls for your obedience as a racial brother. It's not even racial, because the Han is not really an ethnic concept. It's more of a cultural and a historical concept. Ethnicity is also into it, but I think it's much more than an ethnic concept. It's an ethno-cultural concept. So this is the choice that is being presented. And that choice was a fantastic choice, as long as the United States, frankly, did not really understand that they were at war with the Chinese, or the Chinese were at war with them. Today, a situation has come in which, if you're a Taiwanese company, you cannot produce merrily in China and export freely in the United States. India, as I said, we are always in between. We are always, in the middle, in the fence. We are never on one side or the other. Even on this matter on Huawei, I'm still got, I thought it was an obvious choice as to whether Huawei should be here or not. I thought it's pretty obvious. And when I asked very frankly that I was very strongly in favor of the Modi apps ban, I'll be very strongly in favor of a Huawei ban. Why? Because the Chinese artificial intelligence models will be extremely advantaged by metadata from India. We ourselves are not using much of our metadata. I don't know how advanced we are in artificial intelligence, because in India, the official structure has a complete, firewall between itself and ordinary civilians like myself. But the Chinese are certainly gobbling up metadata wherever they can find it. And India was seen by them through these apps, through 5G, etc. And I'm sure Huawei would have given India a terrific deal. They would have spent $10-12 billion into India. I mean, they probably will if they're allowed now. And give really good 5G technology to India. Because essentially what they're looking for is not profit. what they're looking for is Indian metadata through 5G. I'm not a technical man, but I am the vice chairman of the Manipal Advanced Research Group. So I have been in touch with technical people. So I think I can say roughly I understand what is going on. But this is what is going on, frankly. And today, the Chinese have found that the Americans, a little too early, have started understanding this and are starting separating from them. Now, this is making it very difficult for the ethnic Chinese communities in Southeast Asia. They don't know what to do. On the one hand, they have cultural affiliations. Many of them have very close ties, including many in the United States and Canada, if I may say so, in the UK, with the Chinese Communist Party leaders. Many of the leaders have got children who are into business, children who are in America, who are in Canada and the UK. Very good, close personal ties. But today, it's no longer possible to say, I am not hostile to the United States if I am friendly to Communist China. And especially, it is now becoming dangerous to say that or to do in a way that the Chinese Communist Party wants you to do. Because as the war intensifies, the demands are going to intensify. As the demands intensify, the supply of information and other requirements also will intensify. So the need also intensifies. And therefore, and I would like to say Taiwan, for example. 4 years ago, Tsai Ing-wen came to India, President Tsai, and a person I respect enormously. I'm happy to say my university was the host of Dr. Tsai Ing-wen when she first came to India. I wanted her to come a second time. She loved India. She absolutely adored India. And she was very keen on coming to India. I wanted her very much to come to India. And we worked out with the then Joint Secretary in the External Affairs Ministry, okay, she won't go to Delhi, she'll come to Mumbai, she'll come here, she won't meet any politician, she won't meet any media. They agreed to everything. And one day before she was to take the flight, I was informed that, by the Foreign Secretary at that time, Nirupama Rao, sorry, the trip is off. Frankly, personally, now she's the president of Taiwan. She is not hostile to India because of that. But in my personal view, a second visit would have been geopolitically extremely helpful to India. Apart from the fact that she's a staunch Democrat, she's a very strong admirer of India and the Indian experience. I think a second visit, I don't see any reason. Look, I have been to China multiple times. I presume I'm going to go there again. I presume I'm going to be allowed to catch the flight back when I leave the country. I'm certainly not unfriendly to the Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party. I respect the way they have been functioning. If I'm ready to invite Dr. Tsai, and an Indian, I have the right to invite whomsoever I want. As an Indian, yes, one China policy is fine. But in my mind, I don't think Taiwan is part of that one China policy at all. So I don't see any problem in that. But I can only say that, this is just going back into histories, but it's also going into things which, frankly, even today, make me feel a little unhappy about the current situation in which we're talking of balancing and equilibrium and various things. Today, the world, I can tell you, there is no question of equilibrium. There's no question of balancing. In terms of security and defense, there are two rival systems operating and two rival military chains operating, two rival intelligence chains operating, and you're either with the one or the other. I'm not saying cut off trade relations. In fact, I'd like to expand trade relations. And if you have a rupee RMB deal, you'll expand trade from India significantly. But certainly, where defense and security is concerned, I don't think there's any doubt as to where India should go. And any talk of equilibrium or balance, I think, is hiding that. What I'm trying to say, this is a very difficult choice now for people across Southeast Asia. Whether it's in Myanmar, whether it's in Laos, whether it's in Cambodia, whether it's in Indonesia, whether it's in Malaysia, they have to make the choice that Taiwan made 4 years ago. Dr. Tsai, 4 years ago, started separating Taiwan from Chinese supply chains. What you're seeing happening today in Technicolor was happening in black and white during that period. And Dr. Tsai very systematically started integrating Taiwan into US supply chains, including US defense supply chains. In the next 4 years, that process is going to continue. I have no doubt about it. But she began that process almost from the first month of her presidency as part of a very carefully calibrated plan. At the same time, no outward fuss. She never talked about independence. She never talked about freedom. She annoyed purists in her own party. Her current vice president tried to unseat her because she would not shout about independence on the rooftops. She has carried out a policy in which there's no real, there's no provocation. But at the same time, in terms of action, a very clear linking to supply chains distinct from the China supply chain. She got the facts about the war between China and the US, I think, before the US did. And she got the facts between the war between China and the US, I think, before, if I may say so, probably before we have done. The Chinese had that for a long time. The Chinese, frankly, were not very, they were by their actions, they were making it clear. And this is where I can tell you is the opportunity for India. In Southeast Asia, a massive cultural opportunity. Because Southeast Asians are now rediscovering their roots. And a large part of their roots come from this part of the world, especially where you are located, frankly. The Center for China Study, which in Chennai is located. It comes from there. And it comes from all over the country. It comes from Gautama Buddha. And here I can tell you, we cannot ignore the Chinese also. Ethnic Chinese. They have to be told very clearly about the deep philosophical ties between India and what they consider Chinese philosophy and Chinese culture. They have to be told about the Lord Buddha is one of these strands. And I'm glad that we are now doing a lot of work on Lord Buddha. I'm happy to say, for example, you have got Shravasti in Uttar Pradesh. It's being developed now into a major Buddhist center. If you remember, Jetavana and Shravasti were where Lord Buddha meditated the most. Do you know who's doing that renovation? Malaysian Chinese. A group of Malaysian Chinese who are extremely well off in business. They are Buddhists and they're doing it with love and affection. So please understand one thing. The Chinese culture is not an enemy. Chinese people are not our enemy. But what I can only say, Chinese actions on the ground are unfortunately hostile to India. Whether it is across the border, whether it is internal, whether it is to do especially with our friendly next door neighbor of Pakistan, these are certainly not friendly gestures. And I do believe we cannot shut our eyes to them. Similarly, the same situation is going to come. Indonesia, all of them are going to face this existential question of where are we on? Whose side are we on? And I would like to say, if you're talking about Chinese culture, if you're talking about Chinese tradition, please separate it from the PLA, because what the PLA is doing is not Chinese culture and civilization. The PLA is basically following the 19th century playbook of European militaries. The Chinese Communist Party sent a lot of people to study the history of Europe, to study European empires. They have devoted a lot of time. And I think they've learned a bit too much about that. Because today's PLA, as I see it, is essentially a European army of the 19th century. It's certainly not a Chinese army in any creative cultural sense of the term. So what I want to say, I am optimistic about this country, India. We have a fantastic opportunity in terms of our defense and security if we make the right choice. I do believe the Andamans, for example, I've been talking about the Andamans for a long time. I've been talking about the Navy, the Air Force for a long time. And I've been talking about the Himalayan Massif. I mean, the PLA would like the entire Himalayan Massif. Why are they so keen on taking over Gilgit-Baltistan? Because of water. And once they have complete control of water, I can tell you, it's too late. You're going to be part of the Chinese-led group, whether you like it or not. Either that or you go in for droughts. So I'm not sure that is a great thing to allow it to happen. So Gilgit-Baltistan being taken back into India is essential. You need the Americans for that. You need Iranians for that. You need Afghans for that. And you need a significant section of the Pakistan population for that. So essentially what I'm trying to say, in Southeast Asia as well, it's not just a question of tom-tomming our ancient heritage. It's also a question of talking about civilizational linkages. I've gone to classrooms in Beijing. Cambodian students have come up to me. Laotian students have come up to me and saying, sir, you're from India. In my culture, India is so important. Laotian students, Cambodian students, it's really heartwarming, frankly, to hear that kind of thing. And I'm delighted under Prime Minister Modi, culture is also becoming an important instrument of soft power. I've always regarded Bollywood as a very important instrument of soft power. And whether it is Tollywood or Chennai Wood or whatever, all these are very important instruments of soft power. I regard freedom of speech and expression as a very important instrument of soft power. I regard a very strong RTI as a very important instrument of soft power, because that is the only way we can develop our knowledge industries. You have these guys, in the knowledge industry. I've gone to San Jose, for example. I've gone to these labs, these software labs at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. You see somebody coming straight from a bar. The guy is still a little drunk. He flat out on the floor goes to sleep, wakes up 11 hours later and comes up with some of the best software in the world. Now, I think General V.K. Singh had the idea of getting up a cyber corps. I only hope that, that the cyber corps of the army is not like a particular, a particular corporate that started a digital kind of software setup. And they said, you must come every day at 9 o'clock. You must wear a tie. You must wear a suit. And you can leave only at 6:30. So you clock in and you clock out. For God's sake, if you have got a mind which trains you in good software, you're in a slightly anarchic, chaotic mind. And whether you're in JNU or the Center for Chennai Studies, you may say stupid things. If you're doing great things for my country, I don't care what you say. Frederick the Great said, I don't care what the Prussian people say, so long as because I do what I want to do. And so long as they do what I want them to do, I don't care what they say. So what I want to say is that is the inclusive culture of India. And Prime Minister Modi put it best in terms of minimum government, maximum governance. That is what we need to free the Indian people from regulation, etc. And believe me, Indian movies, the Indian private sector, Indian students, and students outside. In India, for example, I come from the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. It used to be the Manipal University. Now it's the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I don't know why. We're not allowed to call ourselves a university because we are private. Manipal is an extremely proud standard bearer of India across the world. And Manipal has been a very strong patriotic nationalist university. Dr. Ramdas Pai, my chancellor, the vice chancellors that I've dealt with, whether it is Dr. Balal, Dr. Bhatt, Dr. Valiatan, and the other vice chancellors I've dealt with, I can tell you, Dr. B.M. Hegde, they're all amazingly patriotic people. The university teaches pride in India. My Department of Geopolitics is giving a course that's India-centric, but we're not allowed to call ourselves a university. So we go outside today, and you have to say, well, you have to explain what Academy of Higher Education is. No, it's not a think tank. It's not, it's not a study group. It's a university. It's not called a university, but it's a university. For heaven's sake, please don't hobble your own country. A lot of techno innovations have happened in India, and they've gone to Singapore, they've gone to America, they've gone to San Jose, because in India, somehow, it's so easy. Some court case. Now, even on this particular discussion, for example, somebody can file an FIR that we're insulting something or we're doing something. A postcard can get you in trouble. That kind of a system we have to rectify. And I am really hopeful that Modi 2.0 will do it. Let me end by saying, I have, from about a long time back, right from the time I came in 2002 in Gujarat, and I realized that Prime Minister Modi, as Chief Minister, had nothing to do with those horrible things. He was being pilloried and persecuted for no reason. I've admired the person. And I do see in Modi 2.0 a very welcome change from Modi 1.0. And I do believe this is our time for India. And India's time is also Southeast Asia's time. India's time is also the time for Latin America. India's time is also the time for Africa and also for Europe and the United States, because the Indo-European culture is a very strong culture. So I only want to say, and I'm sorry I didn't talk very much about Southeast Asia, it's now a battle in progress. In that battle, we have to take the side of the roots of culture. And we have to be, we have to avoid the Chinese mistake of saying that, look, you do this for us, do that for us, and then, you're great. In my opinion, the Chinese are going very far, very fast. Whether they'll succeed or not, I do not know. But it is as much an existential battle as between the USSR and the US. In that particular battle, the US survived, the USSR did not. This particular battle, either the PRC system will survive or the US-led or the US system will survive. And according to many in China, you're going to see chaos in the US on the streets. You're going to see chaos in democracies and all kinds of things. Maybe planning for chaos also in some ways. I'm not sure about any of that. But all I want to say, in my view, if the whole of India cooperates in this civil society, civil servants, government, non-government, different groups cooperate in this, I can tell you, Southeast Asia, the bonds between India and Southeast Asia can be revived and made strong. And these bonds will help them to resist the siren call of getting willy-nilly into a defense and security structure that is now challenging the tenets of liberalism and democracy. I mean, I'm sorry I've been, talking a little too much. I apologize for that. But these are just a few of my thoughts. This is our chance. This is just as China had a chance in the 1980s. When Chief Minister Modi came to China, I was coincidentally there. And I was saying, I wrote in Sunday Guardian at that time, Prime Minister Modi can do the miracle for India that Deng Xiaoping has done for China. We can make a completely modern India, I can tell you. And this is the 1980s for India. This is our chance, this is our opportunity, and Southeast Asia is a very, very important theater for that opportunity, a warm, welcoming, friendly theater. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. I would like to look at this as an Independence Day speech delivered by you, because it is so apt. And it's pointless just looking at the geopolitics or strategy of Southeast Asia, or even for that part of the South China Sea. If you are in a position to understand the psyche of the Chinese leadership, the Communist Party, and also this particular idea of how they are working on dominating the enemy, not necessarily the enemy, but the world, by both direct and covert and overt ways. It is important for us to understand the Chinese first before we can deal with them. So it's from that point of view, I would like to look at all your recommendations and all the background that you have provided, particularly related to the domination of the Han community. But they're going back to the Confucian ways in certain extent, trying to look at cultural backdrop as something which has a foundational value for them to take over the world, though they are under Communist Party, are important points. They also made many other important points. I got about 3-4 pages. I'm not going to read all out of them. I would rather have questions taken first, and then towards the end, I'll maybe flag some issues. 2 or 3 issues which you flagged are very important. One is about the RMB transactions between India and China. That's a very important point that you made, because that is what will perhaps bring about this bartering system which was existing with the Soviet Union when USSR was there. And it did give us a lot of benefits in terms of even going up to the friendship treaty that was signed before we liberated Bangladesh. The other issue was also about the role of technology, which Chinese seem to have understood a lot better. Like you said, the fascination of Xi Jinping with artificial intelligence and all that, which automatically, unlike in India, where people can take to the streets opposing something because the EIA is not good or whatever. The point is that the importance of technology has been understood, and most importantly, the means for the Chinese has not been important. It is the end as you brought out. That is important for them. Therefore, they don't mind, compromising in the interest of national development. So, with these 2-3 brief observations, I will throw the floor open. General Narasimhan wanted to ask a question. He may unmute himself and ask that question. General Narasimhan, are you there? Is General Narasimhan there? He indicated to me that he would like to ask a question, but maybe he's got a technical difficulty. May I also request Professor Madhubala to chip in with her views for 3 minutes, and then also Mr. Sridharan from Chennai Center for China Studies on the points made by Professor Nalapat. Madhubala, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay. I thoroughly enjoyed Madhav's very wide-ranging discussion of how the Chinese have been acting on the basis of their actions and the sort of broad framework within which they have, in a sense, framed their policies, right? Also, the central function of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, in the directions that the state has taken. I don't agree with all of what he said, but I have a couple of questions. One is that the Chinese have linked their the weaponization of culture, or at least the function of using culture as policy, with the very strong economic base that they have, and the very strong economic interventions in the various countries around their periphery and along the Silk Road as well. I'm not sure whether we can take the same track as the Chinese have taken. But I do think that we have an alternative track to take, which is from our own democratic principles of multiculturalism, of tolerance, of dialogue. I think we can use our own cultural practices, revive our old cultural practices, and perhaps revive the kind of cosmopolitanism that is very significant to our existence, both domestically as well as externally. So I do think that we need to consider this idea of a cosmopolitan dialogue, which is really our strength. And whether you think of it in Modi terms, whether you think of it in terms of the traditions of Indian culture and debate, inside Hinduism, with Hinduism and other cultures within India, other religions within India, all of that taken together, I think this idea of cosmopolitanism, which the Chinese have lost, essentially, right? I think this needs to be revived. This needs to be the central icon of any kind of cultural policy that we use in relation to Southeast Asia, in relation to the Indian Ocean littoral, in relation to the Mosam initiative that the government has been talking about, right? But which hasn't actually been fleshed out. So I think we need to pay some attention to that, not just as a woolly-headed cultural concept, but really as the foundation for a real dialogue and a real sense of collaboration and cooperation with countries around the region. I think we have been very defensive about this, and we have not actually, we haven't actually taken the strengths of this idea to our neighbors. We haven't taken it to Nepal, we haven't taken it to Bangladesh, we haven't taken it to Afghanistan or to Pakistan, and even to the Southeast Asian countries, as well, of course, around the Indian Ocean littoral on the western side. So my sense is that I really do think that rather than taking the Chinese cue, which ultimately I think creates many more problems than it resolves for China, and it actually also privileges the idea of Chinese primacy or Han primacy, as you say. I think a much more considered notion of this kind of cosmopolitan dialogue is something that we need to actually be looking at. Thank you.
Sorry, you're mute.
I'm mute?
No, not you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Madhu. What we will do with the permission of the speaker is that we'll take some more questions and then he can respond together or individually depending on how you would like to do it.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond now?
Yeah. Yeah. Just, so far Madhu's concerned, she may not agree with me. I agree completely with her. And if you remember, long back in the 90s, I wrote something called Hindutva. in which I talked about Indian culture being a fusion of the Western, the Vedic, and the Mughal. And all these three strands are important. And I think all these three strands make India very strong. So I fully agree that it's got to be cosmopolitan, which is why I'm saying it's not simply a question of government and government entities. And that is, in fact, the weakness of China. What they call the strong point, if you're looking at martial arts, make it the weakness. And the strong point of India is its people and its democratic spirit. So yeah, I would like to say I completely and totally agree with Madhav.
Thanks.
Again, you're muted. Sorry.
I think, Comrade Vasan, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. There's some auto function, I think. General Narasimhan, you may please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I have two observations and two questions. One, the linkage. One is the linkage that Madhav Nalapat talked about, the Chinese culture and the Japanese. I have a little doubt on that in the sense that I don't think the Chinese have imbibed any of the Japanese culture as I see it. I may please be corrected on this. That is one. Two, how far is this culture of ideology and governance is in conflict with what is being talked about now as a conflict of ideologies between, say, China and US and the other countries? The third one, how much of the culture in the Southeast Asia, Chinese culture in Southeast Asia, the Chinese diaspora has been able to influence? That is the third one I had. On Taiwan, of course, I fully agree with them, but we have been trying extremely hard to get the Taiwanese into businesses here in India. The model that the Taiwanese follow is the MSME model, for which they need a support of an order from a higher or a larger company to place on them to sustain. So that is something that is getting resolved at this point in time. On water, I would like to comfort Professor Madhav Nalapat on the effort that are being done. There are a lot of effort that are being done. I'll interact with them separately to cover this. On the Defense Cyber Agency, it is a work in progress. It is in the nascent stage. It has to go a long way. I have one disagreement with Professor Nalapat though. He says he doesn't know how to dance. I don't agree with him on that, basically because we all dance to our home ministries at homes.
I only want to say that I'm sorry for my, there's no question of Japanese culture and Chinese culture merging, although personally, the Japanese occupied China. And that was, a pretty nasty influence there. But I don't think occupying a country is the best way of promoting their culture. So I'd like to agree with General Narasimhan on that. So far as ideology is concerned, very frankly, the CCP ideology is Han primacy. The American ideology is American primacy. So this is basically the root of the ideology. And I think both of them have very clear ideas about ends and means. For both of them, the ends are what counts. So far as Southeast Asian Chinese communities are concerned, so look, it was very profitable for them to be friendly to both China and the United States. Today, they'll have to make up their mind, are you going to be making your money from China or from America? Because it's increasingly going to be difficult to make it from both. And I can also say, if you're making your money from a lot of political demands and other demands are going to be made on you as citizens of other countries. In Taiwan, for example, it's becoming very, very legally difficult for someone to openly work for the CCP in Taiwan. I mean, in the past, it was a done thing, frankly. There's no problem in working for the CCP, in a camouflage way. Today, under Dr. Tsai, it's becoming very dangerous. In the next 2 or 3 years, even more dangerous. Taiwan, I would only humbly like to say, I do believe we should have more higher level visits. I mean, the health secretary of the US went there. I'd like to see Harshvardhan go there as well, frankly, and learn from there as to how they control COVID. I think we'll have some very useful lessons in India as to how they control COVID. I don't see why we need to be so afraid of a Chinese reaction. I mentioned Dr. Tsai's case as an example of this inordinate fear of the, of the dark. I mean, we have people who are afraid of the dark, and then they sleep very comfortably in the dark once somebody switches off the light. So I don't see why you're so terrified. The Chinese will make ritual noises. fine. You go ahead with that. So I would only like to say, sir, again, I'd like to say, this is another discussant who did not agree with me. I only want to say I agree fully with what he is saying.
Thank you, Professor. There are 3 more questions here. Is Mr. Neelakantan here? Would he like to ask, and he wants me to read out his question? It's also in the chat section. Is Mr. Neelakantan here?
Yes, sir, I'm here. So,
all right, you may please ask your question.
So the question I wanted to ask was, I guess Professor Balla had kind of addressed that as well. The point that I wanted to ask Professor Nalapat